Hey there, welcome to the Yoga for Dentists YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing a recording from one of my boot camps where I talked about why people are ignoring your boundaries and how to fix it. I hope this content is helpful to anyone in the dental profession who is struggling with setting or enforcing their boundaries. If you're interested in diving deeper or would like guidance on creating your boundaries as a dentist, I encourage you to check out the description of this episode for my self-paced Boundaries for Dentists course. All right, let's get to it. Hey friend, welcome. I'm Dr. Josie Dovidio, longtime dentist, registered yoga teacher, and certified wellness consultant. Let's understand why people are ignoring your boundaries so that you can know how to fix it. All right, so the first reason that people are probably ignoring your boundaries is because your boundaries appear to be missing. And there are typically two reasons for this. One, you never set any boundaries. Or two, you have boundaries, but nobody knows you do. And so I'm going to talk about each of those for a little bit, but I want you to be thinking about which one resonates with you. Either you never set boundaries, right? Because you want to be nice, you want to be accommodating, you want to please people, which are all not inherently bad things. But you still need to have some boundaries. Otherwise, people just walk all over you, right? You can still be nice and have boundaries. In fact, boundaries teach people how to get along with you respectfully. So, in order for people to know you have boundaries so that they don't ignore them, first you have to create them in your mind and then feel confident about them so that you can defend them as needed, right? So if people cross your boundaries, you already know what your boundaries are and you're confident enough to let people know that they've crossed your boundaries. If you have boundaries, you also have to be able to articulate them. So ask yourself, do I even have boundaries? Are they nebulous? Do I not even know what an appropriate boundary is? And that's what I see a lot with dentists who don't have boundaries or who feel like they're being continually disrespected, right? Or who have a lot of stress because of all the things that people put on them. They just don't know what their boundaries are, right? So they never set boundaries. And therefore, people don't know what they are and they ignore them. And so that leads me to number two. Let's say you do have boundaries, but the people in your life don't know that you have them. This is usually a result of not having communicated them well, right? Maybe you don't even know how to articulate your boundaries. You just know that something feels icky or not right or disrespectful when people cross them. So in certain situations, people just don't even know what your boundaries are, and therefore it feels like they're ignoring them. So might you benefit from learning how to articulate the boundaries that you have? So it's likely that people are ignoring your boundaries because you don't have any, or you don't know how to articulate them. You haven't really gotten confident in understanding what your boundaries are, or you just haven't told anybody. Sometimes you have to communicate them verbally, and sometimes you communicate them through actions, right? So if people are ignoring your boundaries, it's typically one of those two things. You never set boundaries, and other people don't know that you have them. So be thinking about which one of these two categories is what you're dealing with, and it could be both. But it's important to have the awareness to understand so that you can reduce your frustration when people are ignoring your boundaries, right? So step into your power, start to develop your own boundaries, know what they are, know how to articulate them, communicate them so that you can let people know what your boundaries are, and that will help them work with you respectfully to keep them. The next reason that people are ignoring your boundaries is because you're not enforcing them. Maybe you have clarity about your boundaries, you know what they are, and maybe you communicate them, but people are still ignoring them. And there are typically three reasons why this happens. The first one is because when you were communicating your boundaries, they were listening, but then they simply forgot. And so that can happen, right? You and I forget things all the time. There might be a new rule in town, a new way of doing business, a new way of communicating, whatever it is, whatever the boundary is, you and I might forget, and other people might forget. So that is a thing that happens. The second thing is they weren't listening in the first place. right? You went to communicate your boundaries and they were distracted, they were immersed in something else, and they just weren't listening. So effectively, they still don't know you have this boundary. The third reason that people typically ignore your boundaries after you've shared with them is because they were listening, they heard you, they just don't care. So that's another reason that people will ignore your boundaries. So 3 reasons. They were listening and forgot, they weren't listening, or they were listening, but they don't care. Okay, and so if any of those scenarios happen, you need to get comfortable with the idea of enforcing or defending your boundaries. Now, this doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be confrontational. There are ways to do this that feels in alignment with your core values, that feels authentic to you. But the bottom line is people are ignoring your boundaries because you need to get better at enforcing them. So be thinking about the boundaries that you have set, and be thinking about the people that typically ignore them, and ask yourself, is it because they forgot? Is it because they weren't listening in the first place? Or is it because they just don't care? And what are you going to do about enforcing those boundaries in a way that feels authentic to you? Sometimes boundaries, we think they're going to solve one problem, but they might inadvertently create another problem. That doesn't mean the boundary was wrong. It just means it needs tweaking depending on the situations going on in your life, right? So after testing out some boundaries, you might need to adjust them, especially if you're noticing that people are just flat out ignoring you because in their mind, it seems like a ridiculous boundary, right? That doesn't mean it is. But what you have to understand, if we can take a step back, is that boundaries ultimately exist so that both parties can feel respected. Your boundaries are there so that people can learn how to relate to you in a respectful way. But sometimes we tend to overshoot it, right? We often undershoot it, to be honest, but sometimes we overshoot it and it ends up actually making a relationship more difficult. And so if that happens, then people might just ignore your boundaries altogether because they can't work with it, right? And so another reason people are ignoring your boundaries is if your boundaries need to be adjusted. So if your boundaries are making your life harder, if they're actually impeding relationships, you might need to adjust your boundaries. And there are ways to do that. But there is a caveat to this one. And here is the caveat. Oftentimes, the people who are benefiting from you not having boundaries or not enforcing boundaries and not adjusting boundaries, the people who benefit from those things are going to get upset when you start implementing boundaries because they can't get away with what they used to get away with. So when you're reflecting on if your boundaries need to be adjusted, I want to make sure that you can delineate in your mind between what is a reasonable boundary to adjust so that you can have a mutually beneficial, a mutually respected relationship with someone else, and what is a boundary that's perfectly fine and doesn't need to be adjusted. It's just that that person does not like it because they can't have their way, right? You have to be able to delineate between the two. But once you have a clearer picture of that, then please consider adjusting, tweaking, whatever is needed, certain boundaries so that you can make your life easier, but also set yourself up to be in a relationship that has mutual respect.
Thanks for watching this bootcamp training. If you're interested in learning more about setting and enforcing boundaries, I encourage you to check out my Self-Paced Boundaries for Dentists course. It's an affordable, comprehensive program that will teach you what you need to know to create and maintain healthy boundaries in your personal and professional life. I hope you found this episode helpful, and if you did, please be sure to like and subscribe to this channel so that I know to create more content like this for you. And then share it with your dental friend because that's going to help this information get to the dental community. Be well.